Today, we officially begin our series on the history of Europe. In this journey, you will hear a sweeping story that stretches from prehistoric Europe all the way to Brexit in 2020, a grand narrative filled with drama, conflict, and centuries of transformation. But before we dive into Europe's long and complicated story, we must first answer a fundamental question. What exactly is Europe? Where does the name Europe come from? In English, Europe comes from Europa, the name of a Phoenician princess in Greek mythology. She was said to be extraordinarily beautiful, and she caught the eye of Zeus, the king of the gods. Who was Zeus? We'll talk about him later. But for now, you only need to remember one thing. He was the most notorious womanizer among all the gods. To get close to Europa, Zeus transformed himself into a gentle white bull, deceived her onto his back, and carried her to the island of Crete, where the rest of the mythological events unfolded. Of course, this is only the mythical version. Scholars generally prefer another explanation. The word Europa in Phoenician likely means the land of the sunset, because Europe lies on the far western edge of the Eurasian continent, where the sun sets. Where are the boundaries of Europe? Europe is clearly bounded on three sides. North, the Arctic Ocean. South, the Mediterranean Sea. West, the Atlantic Ocean. Only the east is connected to Asia, forming the Eurasian landmass. For this reason, Europe's eastern boundary has long been debated. In ancient Greek understanding, lands to their west, that was Europe. Lands to their east, that was Asia. And lands to the south, Africa. This means that many regions considered Eastern Europe today were, in ancient Greek eyes, actually parts of Asia. Not to mention Russia. Peter the Great and Russia's turned toward Europe. Centuries later came Peter the Great. He lived during the period when Western Europe began rising rapidly. Determined to modernize his country, he traveled across Europe to learn from its leading powers. When he returned, he pushed aggressively for Russia's westernization. But at that time, Western European powers refused to recognize Russia as European, partly because of prejudice against Slavs, and partly because Russia had long been under the rule of the Mongol Golden Horde. So how did Russia respond? Simple. If you refuse to accept me, I'll fight until you do. Russia expanded westward. To the south, it fought over Crimea. In the center, it clashed with Poland. In the north, it confronted Sweden. As Russia grew stronger, the Western powers eventually had no choice but to acknowledge its place in Europe. In the 19th century, a Russian scholar proposed a boundary that became widely accepted. The Ural Mountains, the Ural River, the Black Sea. This remains the most common definition of Europe's eastern border today. Why did modern civilization emerge in Europe? Before we embark on Europe's historical journey, we must keep a central question in mind. Why did modern science, the Enlightenment, and democratic institutions arise in Europe? There are two major schools of thought. 1. Geographical determinism. This view argues that Europe's unique geography shaped its historical trajectory and gave it long-term advantages. 2. Historical contingency. According to this view, Europe's rise was the product of many accidents and coincidences. There was once another theory, racial determinism, claiming that Europeans supposedly had special genes for science or democracy. Such ideas have long been completely discredited and have no scientific basis whatsoever. The real beginning of European civilization, ancient Greece. Now, we begin at the true cultural birthplace of Europe, ancient Greece. When Greek civilization was emerging, much of what is now Western, Northern, and Southern Europe was still inhabited by tribal peoples. Compared with them, Greek civilization shone with extraordinary brilliance. Later, all of Europe would look to Greece as its cultural ancestor. And since today's world is heavily shaped by Western civilization, the influence of ancient Greece has spread across the globe. Few civilizations have ever had such a profound impact on world culture. Why isn't Greece one of the four cradles of civilization? Although ancient Greece was immensely important, it is not considered one of the four original cradles of civilization. There are two main reasons. Reason 1, Greek civilization emerged later, less important. Reason 2, Greece was not a completely independent origin. The key point, Greece was geographically close to Egypt and Mesopotamia, and its writing, religion, and cultural forms were significantly influenced by these older civilizations. In other words, the four ancient civilizations were the original composers, while Greece was more like a brilliant remixer. That's why Greece isn't listed among the earliest cradles of civilization. Civilization centers and the edges of the ancient world. If we look only at the Old World, Asia, Africa, and Europe, we'll see that the true center of early civilizations lay in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and the Mesopotamian region. East Asia later developed highly sophisticated civilizations of its own, but in the earliest phases of human history, it was indeed on the outer edges of the ancient world's core. And this geographical difference profoundly influenced the direction in which each region's history unfolded.